That day, one of the most unusual pieces of evidence arrived. It wasn't a murder weapon, it wasn't bloodstains, and it wasn't DNA. It was a pair of children's shorts, small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Their owner had been missing for more than 17 hours. Almost everyone involved in the search believed the child had no chance of surviving because he was only 19 months old. He disappeared in a remote stretch of the Gobi Desert, more than 3,000 meters above sea level. A sandstorm had just passed. At night, the temperature dropped to around 10 degrees Celsius. Wolves were known to roam nearby. But the most terrifying part was this. When the child wandered off, he took nothing with him. No shoes, no jacket. In fact, he wasn't even wearing any clothes. I am Record Officer number 11. Today, the evidence being archived is a pair of children's shorts. They weren't stained with blood, but they almost became the last thing a family had left of their child. July 7th, 2025. Just after 8 p.m., in a county in Qinghai Province, China, emergency dispatch received a 110 call. On the line, a mother was crying so hard she could barely speak. "My child, he's gone." Officers immediately asked, "How old is he?" Her answer was only one sentence: 19 months old. The dispatcher fell silent, because they knew a child that young had almost no chance of surviving alone, especially since he had disappeared deep inside the grazing lands. There were no roads, no lights, no houses, only the endless Gobi Desert. Police officers rushed to the scene. At the same time, they picked up the child's mother, who had been at the county hospital. Throughout the drive, she couldn't stop crying. She kept repeating the same words. "Please, find him." More than an hour later, the police convoy finally arrived at the herder's tent. The boy's father had already been searching for 4 hours, covered in mud and sand. He crouched on the ground, unable to stop crying. The mother had wanted to blame him for losing sight of their son, but the moment she saw him, she couldn't say a single word. Then she stepped into the tent and froze. On the bed lay the child's pants, his shirt, his shoes. Everything was still there. When he wandered off, he was wearing almost nothing. That night, the temperature was only around 10 degrees Celsius, and, to make matters worse, it had started to rain. The officers realized the real countdown had begun. The father later recalled, that afternoon, he had taken his 3 children to help a neighbor shear sheep. After they returned, he went out to tend the flock. Their 8-year-old daughter stayed behind to watch her younger brother and sister. They had done this many times before. Nothing had ever gone wrong. But around 5 p.m., a sandstorm suddenly swept in. The father rushed home earlier than planned. His daughter said he was sleeping in the car. But when he looked, the car was empty. The tent was empty too. The little boy, who had only recently learned to walk, had vanished. At first, the father didn't call the police. He believed his son was too young to have wandered very far. So he searched on his own. He drove, he rode on horseback, calling his son's name over and over. Nearby herders soon joined the search, but after hours passed, they found nothing. Then, at around 8 p.m., the father finally realized this was far more serious than he had imagined. After police arrived, more than 50 officers immediately launched a search. Working in pairs, they spread out in every direction, but this place had no roads, no cell signal. Everywhere there were sand dunes, gullies, deep pits. When their flashlights cut through the darkness, they revealed nothing. Then, another discovery made everyone lose hope. Local herders told the police that wolves had been roaming the area in recent days. Earlier that very day, 2 sheep belonging to a nearby herder had been killed by wolves. If the child had encountered a wolf, no one dared to finish the thought. But what puzzled everyone was this: throughout the entire night, there was no crying, no footprints, no clothing, no trace of any kind. It was as if the little boy had simply vanished into thin air. By 5 a.m., the child had been missing for more than 10 hours. The temperature kept falling. The search teams were reaching their physical limits, but no one was willing to give up. At daybreak, more help arrived. Police helicopters, drones, local herders, hundreds of rescuers poured into the Gobi Desert. Police made one decision: search the entire area all over again. The drones flew at low altitude, descending lower and lower. Then, at around 10 a.m., something appeared on the screen, a tiny black dot. The drone pilot immediately lowered the aircraft. 3 meters, 2 meters, 1 meter. Then, he finally saw it clearly. It really was a child. The drone speaker came alive. "Hey, little buddy, can you hear me?" A few seconds later, the tiny figure moved. Just a little. The drone pilot's eyes filled with tears because he knew the child was still alive. Every rescuer rushed toward the location. The father ran as fast as he could, but in the last few dozen meters, he suddenly stopped. Later, he said he couldn't bring himself to go any farther. He was afraid. What he would find was his son's body. The mother was no different. She ran through tears, but her steps grew slower and slower. Then a police officer shouted, "He's alive!" At that moment, the couple completely broke down. The little boy was covered in wet sand. His lips were cracked and dry. The first thing he said when he saw his father was, "Daddy, where did you go?" Then he looked at his mother and quietly asked, "Mom, I can't see you." His mother could no longer hold back her tears. She pulled him into her arms and sobbed. Around them, many of the rescuers were crying too. Later, doctors discovered that the child had suffered almost no serious injuries. To everyone, it felt like a miracle. After reviewing the case, experts believed 3 remarkable coincidences had saved his life. First, wet sand covered his body, creating a natural layer of insulation that slowed the loss of body heat. Second, because he was so young he didn't spend hours crying or calling out, he conserved his energy and was less likely to attract wild animals. Third, the search never stopped. Not for a single moment. For more than 17 hours, rescuers kept looking. And in the end, a miracle happened. Some people said the little boy was simply lucky. But the truth is, the miracle wasn't created by luck. It was created by a father who never stopped searching, by a mother who led the way through tears, and by hundreds of people who spent the entire night calling the child's name again and again. Because sometimes miracles don't just happen, they're made when people refuse to give up on finding someone